Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is Craig Rice. I'm with the Minneapolis-St. Paul Film Society, and I want to thank you for We the People required viewing. It's a conversation that stimulates interest in the Black experience based on the films that are selected. This evening, we have, I think, an incredible film called Soul. Hopefully, we've had a chance to see it. If not, we will be recording this. It will be up on our site at mspfilm.org for later dates. There's a Q&A button. If you have questions, please type in your questions into the Q&A and I'll get to those when it's appropriate. The Film Society is a nonprofit organization dedicated to independent international cinema. I want to thank you for being here, and if you're a member, thank you for helping us to provide this type of programming. If you're not a member, please join. You can go to mspfilm.org for more information. One of the things I want to also thank the people who helped to bring this forward is Penny and Bill George Foundation, Kelly and Mike Palmer Foundation, and NOC for their support in doing this. This project here was really something that I think it's a very important thing for Black people specifically, but hopefully it'll become powerful and important for white people too. This was selected by me because it stands for what I feel is a group of people who are sort of artistic and cultural and media people. I have had years of experience in the power media, and it's very much about who we are as a people. I want to thank the director who was with us, is Melissa Haizlip. I'm sorry. Haizlip. Sorry about that. And slipped me she's the director of this, and you also were one of the producers, along with, I know Sam was involved as a producer, and you had other people. It's great. Dawn Renee Jones, who's a writer, playwright, and theater director, is also with us. And Robin Hickman Winfield, who is a TV producer, activist, and an entrepreneur. She's also with us here today. Soul was a series that depicted Black people, Black art, Black thought, Black politics, and Blackness in general. It honored Blackness. I felt it was a true show that sort of captured what some people considered Black people as the diamonds in America. They were, through the pressure we were created. And I think we have this unique and valuable aspect of us. And I think this film really showed that aspect. It's kind of hard to talk about this because I saw the series, and so it's hard to get into the fact that you made a film about a series, which has got to be probably one of the first kind of things like that. I think what the show did is it focused literally on the Black America for the first time ever. I mean, there was Black Journal, later on there was Soul Train, but Soul really dealt with Black people, the creation. It kind of came out of the Black arts movement, which is something that I want to talk about a little later. But I want to talk a little bit first, just get people's impressions. What was the first time that you saw the show, and what were your feelings? And we just go around and talk about that a little bit first. What do you think? Let's start with Dawn Renee. What is your feeling about this?
I probably saw it in 68, 69. As a young aspiring artist, the great impact that the show had on me is it gave me the audacity to think that I could write. And I'm going to tell you who did it. It was Nikki Giovanni. It was seeing Nikki Giovanni on Soul deliver poetry that did not sound like Byron, Shelley, or Keats. And so that was the first time I heard poetry that I understood, that spoke in my language, that was created by somebody who looks like me. And as a young aspiring artist, I wasn't quite sure what my art was, but I had that people used to say, "You're so artsy." I was a creative person trying to figure out what I was going to do. And seeing Nikki Giovanni on Soul, I want to say, gave me the audacity to think, well, I can write that. If that's what a poem is, I can do that. So I think that kind of thing was probably going on across the country with various artists in various disciplines, especially young people who had not declared themselves artists yet. I was still, typing in the steno pool, but I was leaning in that direction. So I'm going to say, really gave me permission to consider, this might be something I can do.
Okay. What about you, Robin?
Oh, I probably want to go to my dear sister, Legacy Keeper. before I speak. So I want to speak briefly because I just want to just bask in her her gift of being a visionary to do this powerful film. But I think as a child or as a middle schooler who had an opportunity to benefit from that mandate that came from the Kerner Commission in the 60s, when they said that one of the ways to begin to address the unrest of the 60s was to look at media and the role that it played in that unrest. And they created public broadcasting, which was educational broadcasting, turned over stations to the Black community and other communities of color. And here in the Twin Cities, it was Black Voices. And my father and others in the community created a show on public television. So as a little young media maker, I went there and saw visions of possibilities. Black folks from our community that made programming and took their rightful place in a television station to tell our stories behind the camera. And so as a child, I knew of soul. And I was a child that said, I want to work in public television one day. I want to be an executive producer in public television. And then I became, later in my career, an executive producer in public television. So that's what it did. It gave us a vision of possibilities. And for Melissa to give us what, when I did recently an exhibit honoring, my great uncle, someone said it was a love letter to my Uncle Gordon Parks. Melissa, you have given your uncle a love letter with Mr. Soul.
Yeah, I think that's excellent, Robin, because we all I grew up with it. It made me understand here in Minneapolis, including in Soul, but also your father show, Black Voices. I think as a young person, I was going into my teenhoods, and it was, you needed to see that a validation, which I think those shows really gave you. So for me, I'm a huge James Baldwin fan, Just to see James Baldwin actually talk, and not on, on the Tonight shows and things like that, but actually where he could actually talk freely about being Black into a Black audience was really powerful. So Melissa, what drove you to, besides the fact of what we're saying, what was it about the show, and what was your first screening about this,
Well, everything you've all said is just so wonderful and so accurate. And Robin, I loved your message. Thank you so much. I saved it. She called me in tears to tell me how moved she was, and I was, of course, crying then.
That's what we do. We cry. We cry.
Especially everything you folks have just said is right on target, because to see this footage now is very special, but to have experienced it in real time, which was really remarkable. Of course, I was really young, but I also knew that what Ellis was doing was remarkable and was trailblazing and was revolutionary and really represented this moment in time that had crystallized, where Black people were trying to reimagine themselves on this American landscape, as Sonia Sanchez so aptly puts it in the film. And this notion that it was a convergence, and there was Black love, Black thought, Black sister and brotherhood, Black intellect, Black commitment, and the upsurge of Black culture that was really at the intersection of all of these elements. You weren't seeing that anywhere. And so to see it encapsulated on a television show was just really remarkable. And for those of us who are seeing it for the first time, I like to say, it's the greatest show you've never heard of. But for those who have really lived it and have this lived experience and don't see this as some sort of magical unicorn, like it's a real thing, it's really important. It signifies this moment in time and the birth of diversity on television and the birth of this extraordinary movement and push towards Black power television, and connecting with what Gil Noble was doing and what's happening on Black Journal, what's happening on Say Brother. It was the articulation of Blackness in the media space. And so it was very challenging when I first thought, how are we ever going to encompass that in a film? how, with 130 hours, 130 episodes, a span of 5 years, it was very exciting and daunting. But I knew it had to be done because it was in a vault, the archive itself, which is really like a gold mine. Why is it in a vault, I said? Why is this not for the people, by the people, as it was intended initially, and as is what is the purpose of public media and public broadcasting? So there were a lot of reasons why it was time to make this film. And of course, to celebrate an underdog in a way, an unsung hero, a gay icon, you know, many monikers we can put on this man, but really he was a true Black man, a pioneer in broadcasting, and also a very brave soul who was absolutely in love with his Blackness and all of our Blackness. And so I wanted to encompass that in this show as well. So sort of a marriage of the biography of the show and the biography of the man, which was a little bit of a hybrid type of film that we decided to make.
Ask you a question.
Go ahead. Yeah, sure. No,
Yeah.
go ahead. Yeah.
I've seen some of these other shows you're talking about. I worked for Like It Is. I was a producer there. And Black Journal and Tony Brown Show and many other. I've seen other Black TV shows, public affairs shows in that era. Mm-hmm. And Soul was very, very different. And it was different because of Ellis, because Ellis had an artist's eye. Mm-hmm. Ellis curated a show, yes. You know? So I want to know from you, let me just back up a little bit. So having seen The Real Thing, having seen the others, I'm so impressed that you were able to capture Ellis's ethos and aesthetic. That really is what set him apart from what followed. Black Journal, Like It Is, that kind of thing. So I want to ask you as a filmmaker, thematically, aesthetically, what was the shell that you were trying to set this work in? Because you did a really good job of capturing, again, the ethos and the flavor of the show.
Yeah.
So as a filmmaker, tell me, what were you trying to do aesthetically with it?
Well, aesthetically, thank you so much. That was so beautifully articulated, and you did capture the onus behind everything that we did. First of all, we wanted to be true. We wanted to be true to the story, and we knew that there's so many stakeholders, you know, not just the artists involved, but the journey of our people, academically, culturally, historically, orally, in terms of our oral history. There was so much on our shoulders and that would impact getting this story right. And because Ellis was a very special person, very kind person, but he had a lot of relationships, and people who had those relationships with him had a proprietary feeling about the relationship. So we knew that we had we had to get it right, basically. Right. And so, but the idea of getting it right when so many people had different experiences was also weighing heavily on us. And so the guiding principle was always, how do we take this extraordinary show that has in its own innately this aesthetic, as you say, a design aesthetic, a cultural aesthetic, a truth-telling aesthetic, and a politically correct aesthetic, a challenging aesthetic. It was like full of aesthetics. How do you distill that down and marry that to whatever type of characteristic it was of Ellis that put his stamp uniquely on the show? So trying to figure out how much of that was Ellis, how much of that was the Times, how much of that was New York City, and all of these elements were blending to create an imprint on this show. For us, as modern filmmakers, it was incumbent upon us to create a visual aesthetic that would be equally as innovative as, say, Soul was in the 70s and late 60s. So our job was to say, what is it that is making it so gorgeous? Is it the colors? Is it the expansiveness? Is it the design flow? And we thought, well, we're going to have so many different pieces of content that are going in, from videos to archival clips to contemporary interviews, what's going to be our unifying graphic aesthetic or our unifying visual aesthetic that will elevate the soul show, but also warrant, existing in and of itself? Because we knew the pressure was on. The film had to be gorgeous. We wanted it to be cinematic. We wanted it to have a look that would be the right home for this footage. Because you imagine taking this footage and dropping it inside of a project, the project has to be equally as gorgeous, intelligent, worthy. And so in that, that sort of necessity, if you will, that's what drove us. And the way we did that in terms of storytelling and marrying the marriage of the man and the biography of the man and the film was we broke it down into 3 different storylines. And if we figured if we could be honest with those 3 storylines, then we would be getting our story right. And as a filmmaker, I know you're going to appreciate this. So we had storyline A, which was the story of soul. So we know that's a start to finish, pretty much bookended by 1968 to 1972. But you have a wide array, a myriad of extraordinary episodes, elements, design elements, and you go from sort of a unique beginning of a show that's kind of homespun and independent, and it grows and blossoms into this gorgeous show by the end that has its own aesthetic with bright colors and high production value. So we're taking that as storyline A with all the artists and our favorite performances and appearances in it. Then for storyline B, we had the story of Ellis Haizlip. So this was somewhat biographical, but we didn't want it to be a cradle to grave thing because that's not the story we're telling. So can we drop in on these 5 years of soul, figure out what type of imprint he had on those 5 years, and who was he before, during, and after to sort of situate his biography. So then storyline C would have been the zeitgeist. What was happening in the nation? What was happening that would have created an opportunity for soul to exist? And all of these 3 storylines, we literally built, filmed, and edited 3 separate films, color coordinated all the way around the room in the edit bay in 3 different colors with all the, the 3x5 cards. Then we had the difficult job of collapsing those 3 stories into one. Yeah. And figuring out, well, what are the most salient story points that match up in all 3 of those storylines? And there was our answer. Those elements had to earn their way into the story. So nothing was extraneous, and we had to be very economic with our storytelling. And could we pick something from the zeitgeist that matched up with something in that could be told in the archival that also matched with what was happening in Ellis's life and the way he was moving through the world and pushing the culture forward? Wow. And so that's how we culled it from all of the, this massive amount of material, thousands of hours of archival footage in all 3 areas: Ellis's life, the soul show, and of course the zeitgeist. And we that was a really tall order, but it was the only way to attack the project and make sure we had every stone, uncovered, unturned, as they say. Right. And that all of that rested on the intellectual spine of the show, but also the emotional, which is the soul of Ellis Haizlip, and making sure that we were honoring that in every storyline.
Yeah, well done. I mean, there's nothing extraneous there.
Yeah. Right. I think too. I mean, there's so much, Craig. Y'all, this was 2 hours. This needs to be 2 hours. You know it. But I think
I'll try to talk faster.
No.
It's
all good. But I think about how it's so needed for such a time as this, and I'm not going to go there now. But I think about even one of the executive producers, Blair Underwood. I did not even know until I watched it the other day. But it has so much about it all that is such a model for how we must do our projects, making sure that we have the might, behind us taking our rightful place in our stories.
Right.
You know, so a model for Hollywood, folks, step up and get behind us doing our stuff. And knowing Blair, knowing his soul and his spirit, so that I'm not surprised. But everything about it was just a model. It was encouraging. It was soul touching to just, this is how we have to do it. And knowing some of the struggles when we need to be in our place to do our stories, and now more than ever. Working in performing arts, I know this is still, voices are being lifted up to say, hey, wait a minute, no more. We're going to take our rightful place in our stuff. And I don't know what challenges you had, but it just seems like everybody was just so happy to come and celebrate. I had an opportunity to attend a tribute at the Smithsonian about your uncle, where everybody being in the same room with everyone that I saw, most of the folks I saw in the film were in that room at that tribute, and it was absolutely amazing to feel the love that says that love is there to have a return of soul. And I pray that that's something you're thinking about, because we need it now. Hearing Questlove say, what would have happened if soul continued for 20 years? Where would we be as a people?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, because I think that, I mean, we were, you know, Robin maybe would have been really young, but I mean, Dawn and I were young, and it influenced our lives. It literally influenced our lives. And I think that kind of a show is something that's really needed today. I mean, it definitely has, I mean, to Dawn's point earlier about, I always thought Black Journal was a little deep and darker in its, you know, and because it's much more thoughtful. I thought that this show had a Black aesthetic to it that made you proud to be Black. I don't care if you were a dancer, a musician, a poet, you know, I mean, I think that's what that show was about. It didn't just make you think, it just made you, I mean, the afros, trust me, that was, you know, it was like everybody had these afros. So it started with the afro. So everybody, and you saw this sort of collective consciousness that Black people have organically, but you saw it spread out, and you became part of this for that half hour, whatever it was. I can't remember, on the day of the week you look for it. To me, it was like a drug. I had to like watch this show. You know, it was, you know, which you don't have today anymore, which is sort of, you know, this assignment viewing that I have to see this, you know, it's like a doctor's appointment. But I wanted to ask you because to Robin, this has had to have been a hard project to get off the ground, because this is sort of alien landscape for a lot of white people. How did you sort of start this process?
Right.
Alien is a very perfect word for that. Because the idea of initially validating and justifying this show and this effort that we were making 10 years ago was very, very foreign to people. The first thing was, well, how come we've never heard about it? If we haven't heard about it, it doesn't exist. Right. Why hasn't someone made this before? Where are the episodes? Why are they in a vault? And it took it was like a consistent battering down of the walls. I started with funding, because I knew that if we could, since Soul itself, the series, was funded by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, but more importantly, the Ford Foundation, for $3.5 million in 1968. That was a great start for me. And I said, this film has to be the same. It has to have the same provenance. It has to have the same for the people, by the people, with a Black team and the right funding. And it has to be situated in the public sphere as being validated that way as well. So the first thing you do is you go to the public funding that will then attach itself or help you with your trajectory towards a public broadcasting opportunity. And those funders are like the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, but they also happen to be the most competitive and most difficult to get, because those grants are usually reserved for projects that are based on a, you know, Pulitzer Prize winning historical novel. And that's not what we had. We had an idea. You know, I had an idea, but also I was basing it on something that hadn't been done before. And there was no script, and there was no book, and there was no justification for this. So building and building and building and building and getting making connections and especially relationships with the funders to help them understand. And every time you wrote a proposal, or I wrote a proposal, I should say, I wrote them all. Every time I wrote a proposal, it was honing the story better and getting people to read it. And yes, one time I was rejected 17 times for a grant, but I kept trying. Okay, well, how do I make the grant more competitive? What is it about the story that you're not getting? Why is it that you don't need to tell this story? These were all part of this sort of funding goal, this journey we were on. And little by little, we started to gain traction. And we surrounded ourselves with a really important team. We also had a board of academic advisors, and that was really significant. And most important, I know you're going to love this, is that we modeled it after the Henry Hampton School for Eisner Prize. So we created a school where we had a soul school, and we put a summit together, and we were so committed. And of course, we had to have money for all that. So first we had to get development grants. That was research and development, R&D as we call it. Those grants were to create the research that you needed to do, to find all the people who worked on Vietnam and Eyes on the Prize, and figure out how was that model built? What kind of people were in this school? Of course, we couldn't afford 3 and 4 weeks, but we did a summit in New York. We convened all of our scholars. Yeah. We brought in an audience of public television funders, producers, filmmakers, people who had seen the show, and we had a day long of panels.
Brilliant.
Incredible panels.
Yeah.
Panels
Brilliant.
that had everybody on them, from the head of the Schomburg to, Afrofuturists, the new decade, the new generation of filmmakers, discussing all the important issues and taking from that and saying, are we answering that in our script? Are we answering what the masters have said, what the people who have lived are the poets in agreement? We had, we had Sonia Sanchez and the Last Poets, but we also had Khalil Gibran Muhammad, who was at the Schomburg at that time. And so we built it out until everybody knew that we were building a foundation that was impenetrable. And we had people from the arts and the humanities, and writers and people just really important people on our board. Louis Messiah was on our board.
Right.
Hugh Price, who used to run the National Urban League. At the same time, we'd have English professors from the George Washington University. So we really branched out, and all of that would inform the grants. And so people understood, oh, we get it. Her bibliography is 20 pages long. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, she's done the research. Okay, so maybe we need to see what she's talking about and see that this is actually grounded in history. Just because you don't know it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
That's right. Amen.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that we had to ground the film in that sort of space before we could get the right type of funding and then start building around that. So whether or not we got into Sundance Labs or whatever, that didn't really matter. Did we have the strength and the might and the stamp of approval from the National Endowment for the Arts? And so we got our first grant from them. The NEA and the NEH gave us development grants, and that helped us build rapport with our senior program advisors, who would help us build and build and build. And so this has been going on for 10 years. And
wow.
We finally arrived at a place where we had finishing funds, and we had a production grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, which was amazing because they only give 4 a year, and they usually go to projects that already have a broadcast date that are going straight to American Experience or American Masters. We didn't even have a broadcast date, and we were able to get that, but only because the script was steeped in the academic research, and we had to situate it properly before people realized, oh, this is a part of history. Not just broadcast history, but American history.
American history.
Black history. Yeah. And that was unique. And that just because it hadn't been seen didn't mean it wasn't justified and validated. And it's so hard as artists to walk through the world and say, I've got a great project, but don't look at this.
That's right.
Look at what it means. look at what it means in history, and look at what it means to the people, and how can we write that such that it resonates in that way.
Yeah, well, you got to be commended for this journey. I mean, you made visible what was invisible, and I mean, and I think that you're right. The country is going to be better for it. Have you seen? I mean, obviously, white audiences have seen this. Have you seen them become alive by this, or have you seen them sort of be?
I can't tell you how the response has been just so universal. Luckily, we had a really robust film festival run where we screened at over 50 film festivals in a year. I went to almost all of them, running ragged around the country, because it was really important to go to places like True False, or to Indianapolis, or my gosh, we just went all over the country, the heartland, and we opened in Tribeca, but it was important to take it in places where maybe people hadn't seen soul, and to have them experience what really are universal feelings and sentiments in this film, so that they could fall in love with Ellis Haizlip, understand what he's doing, and understand that moving culture is moving change and history, and that the arts are directly related to that, and that Black people have always been excellent, and there's always been this push and momentum. It just hasn't necessarily been visible, or hasn't been really presented in this way. So it was exciting to present it in a way that they could recognize, because everybody loves Stevie Wonder, everybody loves Earth, Wind and Fire. So we already know their household names. We just haven't, it's that moment, that crystallizing moment of the birth of everything that has sort of gotten lost prior to, social media and the digital age, this sort of the era of the strivers, on the heels of the civil rights movement after Jim Crow, trying to create something. That era and the birth of the Black arts movement has been largely overlooked. And I actually wanted to do a series about the Black arts movement, in which, in my opinion, the soul film would fit squarely into one episode, but it really deserves to be like a 4 or 5 part series. And if we look at the Black arts movement and you see, Ramiri Baraka, if you had a book, he would be the first chapter. Sonia Sanchez would be the last. But luckily, we still have Sonia, so it's not over. But this vast information and story is completely underestimated and underappreciated. And we wanted to really just jump off with that, especially because soul was key to providing a platform for those artists.
Yeah, and I think in recognizing who they were, as we talked about this, is that it was literary, and that's hard to do in television. And I know that Don, brought up, Nikki Giovanni and Sonia, and there's several poets. The selection of them, was it just because of the time, or was it something that Ellis was into, was poetry as a voice for Black people? What do you think about that? Either one of you.
Oh, in my opinion, I think that he knew that the poets were the voice of people. And it was such a beautiful expression, and he was convinced it was art. And I think he was constantly trying to show and legitimize all the facets of the Black experience through the arts, and all these forms of expression. And poetry was so immediate and so of the people that was the most expressive. And when you think of it as being, the last poets as being the progenitors of hip hop and all of these ideas that we have about the genesis of the spoken word, you realize that it really is built on the foundation of Black culture, from the spirituals all the way through the spoken word, and now, through music and rapping and performing. But I think he knew that the poets really had their finger on the pulse of the culture. Right. And that the word on the street in a poetic way was different than any other type of expression that was available. And I think he was very excited to show that, and especially to show the women. And he was a feminist, and I try to show that in the film, that he knew that there were interesting women doing interesting things. And it wasn't just because the larger women's movement was happening, because Black women were not in the
it was different
of feminism at all. But they were always the backbone of every movement, whether it was the civil rights movement or, you know, they were always there pushing. And,
the suffrage movement.
yes,
Yes.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so for him to choose these women to put out front, that was really, really
Right.
daring. When black, you know, no one was checking for black women back then, especially not on television, and to be positioned this way, such that Nikki Giovanni could interview James Baldwin. You have these two icons of the black literary canon. But where would you see that? Because you read books, but you never get to hear the mindset behind those, you know, literary choices. And that's what was fascinating about Ellis, always sort of unraveling a new aspect that you hadn't seen or heard before. And thank God he did, you know.
Dawn, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say he was such a mentor. I came to New York in '73 and I met Ellis, and I was kind of in the outer circle or part of the young black artist circle in New York at that time. And so our paths crossed many times. One of the things I remember about him that adds to his legacy is the fact that he was such a mentor to young artists and young women artists. So, you know, the producers on his show, Anna Horsford, it was such a delight to see Anna. Way before she got famous on TV, she was behind the scenes working with Ellis. Right. And Loretta Green, who was just this phenomenal actress. And I completely forgot that Loretta had also worked for Ellis behind the scenes in production. He was an incredible mentor. So I'm curious, because I've kind of lost track, it's been a very long time. What other projects was Ellis involved in after Soul closed? Because he continued to stay active. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. I think he knew that it was not the end. And I love the line that he reads in the, it's actually a telegram, for those of us who remember what those are. He got a telegram from Patti LaBelle and her husband that said, for the last show, and he reads it on the last show of the last season. Although it's over, it's not the end. Black seeds keep on growing. Yes. Which also happens to be the lyric of a song that we know and love. But this idea that it was just the beginning. And even though the show was ending, I think he knew it had left a lasting impact, and he was hoping that he could pick up the mantle elsewhere, and that it was just the start of a conversation. And so he did a lot of different things, working with it was very important for him to work as like an institution builder. Black institutions was very important to him.
Yes.
So he was always the first on the board. He was the first on the board of Bill T. Jones and Arnie Zane's company. He was the first on the board of Alvin Ailey, and took Alvin Ailey to Europe to create the company and encourage him, even with 6 dancers, to tour. He was always creating opportunities and institutions that people didn't think we deserved to have, because Black art hadn't been validated, just like jazz music hadn't been justified, validated in those early days. So one of the things he did was he went up to the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, part of the New York Public Library, and helped to create the new footprint for that, and convinced Howard Dotson that it's not just a library. It can't just be a room where you check out books and leave, that Harlem needed a cultural mecca. And so he became the head of cultural programming there, and brought that idea of soul from downtown to uptown, and brought a lot of the artists in, convinced them to reimagine that space and build it out. Because I remember when I was working for him there, they just had a few tiny little offices, no rotunda, no theater, nothing. And we have to go up to Aaron Davis Hall, which is part of the City University of New York, to have a concert or to have an event. And it wasn't in the Schomburg proper. So he convinced them to rebuild. And so the Schomburg that we know and love today is based on Ellis's encouragement to make that a space, a public space. So he would bring writers and poets and authors. He brought, oh my gosh, who am I thinking of? The Octavia Butler to come talk about in science fiction. He would bring, incredible artists that you would never expect to be there. He brought Maya Angelou to come speak, and created something that they never had before, which was called Founders Day. Let's make a holiday out of the beginning of the Schomburgs. He was constantly bringing culture into the public eye, and he would always work together with a lot of different groups, whether they were the Greeks, like the Deltas, or the National Urban League, or the Congressional Black Caucus. He was recording the incarcerated people in Sing Sing and letting them do poetry and create albums like this, just always pushing the culture forward. And it was really pretty remarkable. He's responsible for some of the greatest going home ceremonies because he was close to James Baldwin. He did produce that funeral at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. He also produced the funeral of Alvin Ailey. You know, these big, massive cultural events he was always responsible for behind the scenes and would make these beautiful, dramatic transitions. So he was very much doing as much as he could in institutions, in theaters, producing and supporting the next generation of artists.
Craig, before
Yeah,
Craig gets to questions from the audience,
No, go ahead.
can you, Melissa,
Yeah.
and I still get chills. You blessed me by having me be a guest at your amazing tribute to your uncle last summer, Soul at Lincoln Center, when you had the celebrate 40th anniversary. And we got to bask in the music of Donny Hathaway and many of the other artists that would perform with his daughters, lifting up their father's music. But you were just radiant that night. For me to come out from Minnesota and see blocks of Black and brown people waiting to get in. But that was another event, gift that he brought to people. So if you talk just a few minutes about that.
This is another remarkable thing that he did that, again, was sort of lost to history. He had this idea of having the first collaboration of the Black community with Lincoln Center just years after it had been built. And as you know, that was quite a hotbed of controversy because it was the area that became Lincoln Center was public housing. And he, you know, it was raised, and it created quite a controversy because our people were displaced mostly. And so Ellis wanted to kind of heal those wounds and feel like we needed to take our rightful place in this space again. And he was the first to collaborate with Lincoln Center to create a 2-week Black arts showcase called Soul at the Center, aptly put. And so he brought the Soul show to Lincoln Center with a vast array of programs, concerts, hair braiding in the middle of the courtyard, but also really fancy religious services, giant headliners, and I'm talking giant because he got artists who couldn't perform on Soul, like Tina Turner, Ike and Tina Turner. Incredible, just remarkable. So this show lasted for 2 years. It was 2 weeks for 2 years. And he even had Nina Simone headline and a Sister Rosetta Tharpe. And everybody you could think of was in this show. Just remarkable. Again, lost to history. So we decided on the 50th anniversary of that, Soul at the Center, to reimagine it for a modern world, but with homage to what happened at that time. And so we recreated for the kickoff of the Lincoln Center Out of Doors program, which is an out of doors program they do every year except for this summer due to COVID. And we were able to recreate in one night the same type of program that he did for 2 weeks. And we featured Layla Hathaway as the first daughter of Soul, doing a concert of all the work that her father had ever written, the entire opus, with a 72-piece orchestra and her band. It was just outstanding. And to think that her father had been on that stage 50 years ago at Soul at the Center as well was really remarkable. So we're just trying to bring back this idea of why are these great cultural events lost to history? They really shouldn't be. You know, I walked into Lincoln Center and nobody knew what I was talking about. Luckily, I had my binder. And I was like, here you go. I Xeroxed every article I found about it in the New York Times and elsewhere from the 1972 and 73. So it did exist, but even the many of the people there didn't know about it, except for one woman who was really eager to recreate it, Jill Sternheimer. So she worked with me to create this incredible night, incredible tribute. And the line was around the block. There were over 5,000 people trying to get into a free concert. So it just shows you, you know, not only did Ellis Haizlip champion Black culture, but it just shows you how important our stories are now, even more than ever.
Do you think that, this was the question, do you think that what's happened, I mean, what he did and obviously the show and everything, it seems like it was a time and a space, and it seems like there's something that we've lost. Is it because have we sort of been so assimilated into sort of mainstream media TV that we've lost some of these, I think, some of these iconic special events? What do you think? It's not blaming his show or not blaming, it's just interesting you say that, because it was just one of the questions. We don't see that now today, when we should see that on, it should be like a regular soul show on, you know, television. It should be, you know, but I wonder what the curiousness of that, what has happened to that?
I think a lot of it has to do with the commercializing of television and the commercial aspect of television and the promotional aspect of television and all those that are paying for it. And so that sort of dictates what we see, when we really don't realize that most of what we see is an ad for something else. And what was beautiful about Ellis's show, Soul, was that not only was it undiluted and unapologetically Black, but it didn't have an agenda behind it. It didn't have a white gaze. It didn't need permission or ask permission. And so we are living in a different world now where all of those leanings tend to, you know, obfuscate this truth that we have. And we can't be truth tellers on television so much. And,
yeah, even on PBS, I mean, it's, you know, it's even there, you know.
Sure, and think about that and the funding goals and the agenda of those who are funding, and, you know, it sort of impacts what we see. And I think the people that are really speaking truth to power now are independent artists with their podcasts, and with, you know, Nicole Hannah-Jones with her 1619 project, and people not asking permission to speak the truth and to speak truth to power. It tends to be on other platforms. So maybe it's about creating a new space in this new era for sort of this post-genre expression. You know, we're not caught up in what used to be public television or what of the models that we knew. Just like Soul was breaking a model that we knew. Maybe we have to break that model now.
I think the assimilation piece has a lot to do with it. You know, when in the late 60s, early 70s, when it appeared as though racism was a thing of the past, and we were allowed to live in the suburbs, and we got some of those good corporate jobs, and so as we left our communities and went to the suburbs and moved on up, abandoning our communities in some way, but also abandoning or forgetting, losing our understanding that it was our community that was really our soul and was really what was holding us together. So I think that we've had maybe 30 years of that momentum forward. I mean, look at in Chicago was the Regal Theater, gone. You know, it's comparable to the Apollo. That we entered a period, I think, from the mid 70s on, where we wanted to play the Copacabana. That had more value to us than playing in, you know, at the Apollo or the Regal or Baker's in Detroit or some of those places. So there was that forward momentum that kind of dispersed us out. But I think the pendulum is swinging now back, and we're seeing that with the podcast, with the young people. But it took it swinging in that direction for the young people to say, wait a minute, I don't care what white people say or what they think. And it's beginning to swing back. And it's really exciting to see that. And I think that that's the wind. That's where the tide is going now. You know, an example of that is seeing, what is his name? Kenya Barris's Black AF, that he made his money doing mainstream, acceptable for the white gays, Blackish, etc. But now he's in a place where he can do what he wants. And I watch Black AF sometimes and I think, oh my God, is he actually saying that? To me, he's talking to us. He's being unapologetically talking to us. So again, I see that pendulum swinging back around. I think we're in an exciting era with more to come. I mean, look at Lena Waithe. Started with the podcast. You know, I got to write on somebody else's show. They let her, she got one foot in the door, she's blowing up. And she's doing unapologetically Black programming. So I think this is a second renaissance or a third renaissance of us creating our own work for us, by us.
Very key. And we had this wonderful talk back last night that we did for our show. And it was sort of a way of celebrating the opening weekend of Soul, Mr. Soul, but also just acknowledging this time period that we're in. Of course, we acknowledged the loss of Chadwick Boseman and simultaneously the March on Washington. And it was a real moment of healing. And we had over 4,000 people in Facebook Live, which was remarkable. We were broadcasting on Eventive that went through the YouTube page and also onto Facebook Live. And it was remarkable because we had people in this kickback, we called it, because that's what you call it now, in this chat that you would never expect to see. You know, we had Nikki Giovanni on Zoom.
What?
So, yes, it was extraordinary. But what we did was we made it so that it was like a bridge for old and new, young and old, everything that we know, and the new guard coming in. So it was hosted by Amanda Seales, who is the amazing comedian from Insecure. And she also has an amazing podcast, Small Doses, and Smart, Funny, and Black. Yes. So she was a remarkable, she's also a rapper, poet, you know, multi-hyphenate. And to have her hosting this Q&A was like, she was a legacy of Ellis Haizlip. And we had everybody from The Last Poets to Nikki Giovanni. We also had the wonderful Sonia Sanchez. We had the group Black Ivory. We had The Last Poets and Felipe Luciano.
He
went in. But we also had Robert Glasper, who was our composer, and Layla Hathaway, representing the new generation of soul, and Stan Lathan, the original director of soul. So it was just extraordinary. And there, you can see the link. It's we archived it. It's on our YouTube and Facebook page. But it was so full of energy, and we went back and forth between what it was like then and what soul means for a millennial generation. And to have this young woman who had posted a clip of the Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin episode on her Instagram and nearly broke Instagram with 500,000 likes and reposts and comments. Literally 455,000. If you look, you'll see. I love it. And here she is now talking to Nikki Giovanni, her idol, just like Nikki Giovanni had talked to Baldwin. And I just had the chills because I couldn't believe this Zoom. I'm looking at the Zoom saying, how did we get Nikki Giovanni in a Zoom? And Blair Underwood and the Last Poets. It was just incredible. And it was indicative of how much we still need this content and this opportunity to express ourselves. And if you watch it, you'll see, you know, it was just extraordinary. Everybody was open and just talking about what we need to talk about today, not just reminiscing about that Black Ivory show or, you know, when Stevie did Superstition or, you know, all the episodes that Stan Lathan directed, but talking about Black men getting shot 7 times in the back. Right. Okay. And what does that mean for us now? And what do we need to do now? And what, not how do we feel, but what are we going to do? And that when I look back, I'm sure when we look back on this time, many people will ask us, gosh, how did you get through that? What did you feel? And my question is, no, what did you do?
What to do?
It's
What do
time-
we
it-
do?
Yeah,
We
what do
get,
we do?
we make sure, sister, that we do whatever we need to do to make sure that soul returns with and supports you, that public television brings it back, because we pay taxes. We can have many different platforms, but we pay taxes. Our money goes to public television through our taxes, so we demand that you bring it back. That's what we do. First, we start with them broadcasting Mr. Soul, and then we support and do whatever we need to do for you to bring it back for such a time as this. That's what we do.
Yeah. And that's
So you know I got you.
I
I'm
hear you.
so
I
serious.
feel you.
I'm so serious.
I got it. I got
I'm
it.
claiming it.
I'm claiming it too. And that's why we're showing the film right now in virtual cinemas. A lot of people are saying, why are you doing it now? Because we need it now more than
We
ever.
need it now.
We need an upliftment. We need a reminder of our greatness and our blackness, and that those two are synonymous. We need this. And we need to know that we have always been excellent, and that there are people doing great things and have always done great things, and that we're not lost right now. And all is not lost, even though these are dark times and we are disproportionately affected by this horrific pandemic. And so many people have lost their lives and their jobs and their sustenance and their families. This is all very true. And yet, still, we ask ourselves, how do we survive? And what have we always done to survive? And that is what I feel is depicted in this film and in this show, is Black joy. Black joy is revolutionary. And Ellis knew that. And he found that joy within the chaos. And he found that joy within the art, and within the restrictions, and within the holdbacks, and the lack of diversity, and the lack of representation. And he turned all of that on its head and said, no, actually, we are doing this. This is our renaissance. We are ushering a new renaissance, a new Harlem Renaissance, if you will. We are taking the stage and changing that dynamic. And I think every night he was changing the perception of African American culture, or changing the minds of people who had a certain perception.
And I think
that's what we're doing right now, and trying to get the film out now.
Yeah, I think that's what the film does.
Giving people the agency to watch the film themselves. And that's again, it's a workaround because the theaters aren't open, but why not give them something? And by showing it in virtual screens, we're also supporting the independent cinemas that are struggling right now, because these are the theaters where we would show an independent film. But you're also, in paying $12, you're also supporting Black film and independent film. And that's something you can feel good about. So we are like, yeah, let's do this now. And it'll be for us, and it'll be by us.
I love it.
It's a completely new model.
I want to give you, before we get off here, I want to give everybody a chance just to kind of say, it's that time.
Do you have some questions? I'd love to answer some.
I think you did. I think, we had a few, but I really want to kind of, before we get off here, I think one of the questions really was about Gen Zs, which is the younger generation. I think, is there any kind of movement in your organization, since you've got a bunch of people, to actually approach them with this? Because millennials are, they are where they are, but the Gen Zs, this is the high school kids. How do they tap into that? Is there some specific program for them that you guys have?
Well, one thing we've always done is try to find room and space in our organization, in our building, in our actual production for young folks to participate, because nobody really thinks enough about that participation and what that would mean and how that would open minds. And so we've always had people who, I've gone out of my way to partner with HBCUs and find students that would be interested in learning about film, learning about journalism, learning about history and broadcast history. We've worked with a lot of interns that way, and also found internships in different colleges around New York, especially, and just trying to find opportunities where we can engage young minds and say, this is not history. This is just something that happened a long time ago, but look at all the parallels now. Look at the administration now, for example. That is a direct parallel to what was happening in 1968. Look at our revolution now. That's a direct parallel to the revolution of 68. So it's really important to try to use soul as a message and as almost like an educational tool to say, look how far we've come and yet how far we have yet to go. And that is a message you can share with anyone. They don't have to be, you know, in their 20s or 30s or even in college. You can start early with that. So we're always trying to find opportunities and bring on younger minds, and learn from them too. We did an amazing collaboration with Howard University's Capcom Communications through the Department of Communications program, in which I worked with graduating seniors in a course that would help them understand what making a film was. And at the same time, they were helping me create a small HBCU tour. And we started at Howard, since Ellis went to Howard. We went to Morgan State and Coppin
Me
State.
too. Yeah.
Hey, and just finding a way to engage folks to say, you know, look at this material and what does it mean to you? How would you bring this to your, you know, the Greeks over in Morgan State? And what's the what are the dynamics there? How do you write an evergreen article about something that's historic and get that article in every HBCU magazine? So it was really a phenomenal thing. And because they were getting graded, it had to go well for them. And it just showed me so much. It took a lot of time out of my filmmaking, but to say, this is what we need to do. It's not just a film. It's not just a one-off. It's the beginning of a movement and a dialogue, and it's inclusive, both in age and color and time.
What's next for you?
This is a big deal.
A
little busy with that, but I'm also working on a new series. I'm again elevating the stories of Black women is very important to me, and at the intersection of racial justice, social justice, representation. I like to amplify that in my work, and so I'm making a series about the incomplete, because we're still here, history of Black womanhood in America, explored through the lens of Black women in hip hop, their lives and their music. So this is a 4-part series I'm co-executive producing for Netflix. And I'm really excited about it because there's been so much erasure, not just in all of our history, but specifically in hip hop and in American history, of Black women's contributions, both musically and culturally.
Yes.
And that voice needing a space. So I'm very excited about that. And I'm also developing a documentary on Earth, Wind, and Fire, and a couple other projects. I'm hope to be working with Jermaine Dupri on a project of his. So yeah, there's a lot cooking right now.
Yeah, that's very good. So Don and Robin, you got any final words here before we depart?
No, you know, I was just thinking while I was listening to Melissa, how one of the wonderful things that Ellis did with soul that I think we could use right now is that he introduced Black people to things that we were not familiar with, that were part of our culture. So again, I reflect back on where I was when I first was introduced to soul, and I was all about Motown, and if it wasn't Motown, I didn't want to hear it. And so to witness the programming on soul let me know that there's more to Black music than Motown. Was like, whoa, wow, I never really, you know. And I think we definitely need that today, because so much of the young people's expression has been cooked down to hip hop. And we just need to let's open this back up. Let's breathe a little bit more air into it, that there's infinitely more to our experience than the little bit we get to see on commercial media.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really true. You can see it even in the dance with, you know, the Avalon and so that we weren't just about contemporary dance styles. We actually have a breadth there, you know, so definitely. Robin, what do you think?
Your spirit lights, sis, and the ancestors are smiling. That's all I can say. You're a legacy keeper extraordinaire. Thank you so much.
So I want to thank you all. We ran a little bit over. I gave that a few more minutes for Robin for your request, but I want to thank you guys for being part of this and being part of this discussion. And for those who have not seen the film, please see the film. The conversation has been recorded. It will be
so good to meet you, Melissa.
Be on Facebook.
Yeah.
Again, thank you for having us. I want to thank our sponsors here, Penny and Bill Carl, George Foundation, Kelly and Mike Palmer, and Knock. Thank you guys for being part of this. And for more information, go to mspfilm.org. And good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Melissa.